The acrid stench of smoke and burning flesh still hangs heavy in the air above old Yharnam, decades after the flames died down to embers. From his perch atop the clock tower, an old hunter sits vigil with his Gatling gun, watching over streets populated only by those the world has deemed monsters. Meanwhile, in the shadowed alcoves of Cathedral Ward, another aged hunter moves with the grace of a crow, her blade singing through the night air as she delivers what she calls mercy to those who've lost themselves to bloodlust. Two hunters, two definitions of mercy, two irreconcilable truths born from the same nightmare. Welcome, fellow seekers of forbidden knowledge, to another deep exploration with Keen 7 lore, where we delve into the darkest corners of gaming's most profound mysteries. Tonight, we examine perhaps the most fascinating philosophical divide in all of Bloodborne, the stark contrast between Eileen the Crow and retired hunter Djura, two veterans who survived the hunt only to find themselves on opposite sides of what it means to show compassion in a world gone mad. Picture, if you will, the moment when a young hunter first encounters either of these legendary figures. With Eileen, it might be in that narrow passage beside the sewers of central Yharnam, where her distinctive plague doctor mask emerges from the shadows, like death itself given form. Her voice, weathered by age but sharp as the twin blades she wields, carries both warning and wisdom. A hunter should hunt beasts, she tells you, and in those 5 words lies an entire philosophy built on necessary cruelty. She speaks with the casual confidence of someone who has long ago made peace with violence, who understands that in Yharnam, the kindest thing you can do for a blood-drunk hunter is to end their suffering swiftly. Now contrast this with your first glimpse of Djura, not the man himself, but his handiwork. The ladder leading up to old Yharnam bears his warning, scrawled in desperation or determination. Turn back, or the hunter will face the hunt. Then comes the thunder of his Gatling gun, bullets raining down like judgment from on high, not because he enjoys the killing, but precisely because he abhors it. When you finally reach his tower, if you approach with understanding rather than violence, you discover not a mad hermit, but a philosopher, a man who looked into the eyes of beasts and recognized something unbearably human staring back. These two hunters represent the fundamental question at the heart of Bloodborne's narrative. When faced with irreversible transformation, is mercy found in the bullet or in the turned cheek? Is it kinder to kill what was once human or to protect what still might be? The game refuses to give us easy answers, instead presenting us with two individuals who have dedicated their remaining years to living out their conflicting truths. If you're finding value in this exploration of Bloodborne's moral complexity, I'd genuinely appreciate if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow hunters through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth lore investigations coming. The Hunter of Hunters tradition that Eileen embodies is ancient, predating even the healing church's prominence in Yharnam. The practice originated in foreign lands, where sky burial was common, a ritual where the dead were offered to carrion birds, returning the flesh to the cycle of nature. This philosophy permeates everything about Eileen's approach to her grim duty. She doesn't see herself as an executioner, but as a necessary component of a natural order, someone who prevents the corruption of blood-drunkenness from spreading like a plague among hunters. Her badge, passed down through generations to outsiders who could view Yharnam's customs with the clarity of distance, marks her as both protector and predator. Consider the weight of her burden. Every hunter she kills was once a comrade, someone who fought alongside others against the beast plague. These aren't mindless monsters she's eliminating, but people who still retain their human form, their skills, their weapons. everything except their sanity. The blood-drunk hunters she pursues have succumbed to something perhaps worse than beasthood. They've retained their human cunning while losing their human compassion. They hunt for pleasure now, not duty. And in Eileen's eyes, this makes them more dangerous than any transformed citizen could ever be. Her weapon of choice, the Blade of Mercy, tells its own story. Forged from siderite, the same meteoric metal used in Gehrman's burial blade, these twin swords represent a direct link to the very first hunters. When Eileen wields them, she's not just carrying weapons but tradition itself, a philosophy of hunting that predates the Healing Church's methods and moral compromises. The blades can be split or combined, offering versatility that mirrors Eileen's own complex nature. Sometimes she must be swift and surgical, other times brutal and final. The way Eileen moves through Yharnam speaks to decades of experience. She doesn't patrol or actively hunt. Instead, she appears where blood-drunkenness has taken root, as if drawn by some preternatural sense for corruption. Her encounters with the player character reveal a gradual trust, first warning, then acknowledgement, finally, partnership. She tests your character not through words, but through observation. Do you hunt beasts, or do you hunt hunters? Do you kill for purpose or pleasure? In her eyes, the distinction between hero and villain lies not in the act of killing, but in the reasoning behind it. If you're finding this deep dive into Bloodborne's hunter philosophy compelling, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these detailed investigations possible, allowing us to explore the stories that define gaming's greatest narratives. Yet even Eileen, for all her conviction, shows signs of doubt. Her quest line reveals a woman pushing herself beyond her limits, age finally catching up to a body that has endured decades of violence. When she faces the bloody crow of Cainhurst, a hunter whose blood-drunkenness has evolved into something approaching art, she either falls or barely survives, depending on your intervention. In either outcome, she passes her mantle to you, the player, with words that suggest relief as much as responsibility. Don't you ever listen to your elders, she might say, but there's affection in the reproach, perhaps even pride that someone will continue her work when she no longer can. Now let us turn our attention to Djura, whose story presents an entirely different response to Yharnam's tragedy. Where Eileen embraces her role as Death's agent, Djura has rejected violence altogether, or at least violence against those he once would have hunted without question. The retired hunter, as the game officially designates him, stands as perhaps the only character in Bloodborne who has looked at the cycle of hunt and horror and simply said no more. To understand Djura, we must first understand the powder kegs, the workshop of hunters to which he once belonged. These weren't your typical Yharnam hunters with their trick weapons and calculated strikes. The powder kegs believed in overwhelming firepower, in weapons that could clear streets rather than duel individual beasts. Their philosophy was one of efficiency over elegance. Why risk close combat when you could simply blow your enemies apart from a distance? This approach worked brilliantly until it didn't, until the very power they wielded became the instrument of old Yharnam's damnation. The burning of old Yharnam stands as the pivotal moment in Djura's transformation from hunter to protector. Official sources tell us that the ashen blood sickness swept through the district, a plague that transformed citizens into beasts at an unprecedented rate. The Healing Church's response was swift and merciless. Burn it all. Every building, every street, every man, woman, and child who might carry the infection. The powder kegs participated in this cleansing. their weapons turned from instruments of protection to tools of genocide. Djura was there, adding his fire to the conflagration, watching as people, not fully transformed, still recognizably human, screamed and burned. But where others saw necessity, Djura saw murder. Where others heard the howls of beasts, he heard the cries of victims. The game describes him as a very kind and stupid man, but there's nothing stupid about recognizing humanity where others see only monsters. His decision to protect old Yharnam's beast population isn't born from madness, but from a moral clarity that's almost unbearable in its implications. If the beasts retain some element of consciousness, some trace of the people they were, then every hunter becomes a murderer, and every hunt becomes a massacre. Consider the logistics of Djura's self-imposed exile. He sits atop his tower with that Gatling gun, not sleeping, barely eating, sustained by a will that borders on the superhuman. He has turned old Yharnam into a sanctuary, the one place in all of Yharnam where beasts can exist without fear of hunters. His warning shots aren't meant to kill, though he certainly will if pushed, but to deter. Every burst of gunfire says the same thing. These creatures are under my protection. Find your beasts elsewhere. The game provides subtle evidence that Djura's compassion isn't misplaced. The beasts of old Yharnam behave differently from those elsewhere in the city. They patrol in patterns that suggest memory, gathering in places that might have held meaning in their human lives. Some still wear the tattered remnants of clothing. They attack intruders, yes, but is this aggression or territorial defense? Are they monsters, or are they simply protecting their home, the only way their transformed bodies allow? When you finally reach Djura's tower and engage him in dialogue rather than combat, you encounter a philosophical depth rare in any medium, let alone a video game. He speaks of the beasts with genuine affection, calling them not what you think. He reveals that both he and Eileen once participated in the hunter's dream, both drifted, as he puts it, but both eventually woke up, freed from the cycle, but forever changed by it. This shared experience of transcending the dream makes their philosophical divergence even more poignant. They've seen the same truths and drawn opposite conclusions. Djura's dialogue reveals a man who has thought deeply about his choices. The things you hunt, they're not beasts. They're people. One day, you will see, he insists. And in that statement lies a complete rejection of everything the hunt stands for. He doesn't deny that the creatures below were transformed, doesn't pretend they're safe or tame. He simply refuses to accept that transformation equals damnation. In his view, to hunt beasts is to abandon the very humanity hunters claim to protect. The spare but telling details about Djura's companions add another layer to his tragedy. He speaks of them in the past tense, suggesting they either abandoned his cause or died defending it. The game hints that the hostile hunter you encounter on the way to his tower might be one of these former allies, now reduced to mindless aggression, ironically becoming what Eileen would classify as blood-drunk while defending Djura's philosophy of mercy. This presents a cruel irony. In trying to protect beasts from becoming victims of hunters, Djura may have created the very type of corrupted hunter that Eileen seeks to eliminate. The weapons associated with Djura tell their own story. The stake driver, that brutal pneumatic fist weapon, represents the powder keg's approach to hunting. Overwhelming force, delivered at close range. The fact that Djura has abandoned such weapons for the defensive position of his Gatling gun shows a complete reversal of his hunting philosophy. He no longer seeks out beasts to destroy, but waits for hunters to repel. The Gatling gun itself, which should be a weapon of indiscriminate destruction, becomes in his hands a tool of selective protection. The burning of old Yharnam, that catastrophic event that shaped both our subjects in different ways, deserves deeper examination. The official records speak of it as a necessary containment measure, but the evidence suggests something far more complex. The ashen blood sickness that prompted the burning was itself likely connected to the healing church's experiments, another in a long line of disasters born from humanity's attempt to transcend its limitations. The church distributed blood ministration throughout old Yharnam, promising healing and transformation, delivering only horror. When the sickness spread and transformations began, the response was swift, but not uniform. Some hunters argued for quarantine, others for selective elimination of the fully transformed. But someone, and the game implies it was the healing church's leadership, decided on total annihilation. Fire would cleanse where blood had corrupted. The powder kegs, with their expertise in incendiary weapons, became the primary instruments of this cleansing. Imagine Djura in those moments, his flamethrower turning homes into pyres, his explosives collapsing buildings onto families huddled in basements. The game tells us he was uncommonly kind even then, which makes his participation all the more tragic. Did he hesitate before each trigger pull? Did he tell himself it was mercy, that burning was better than the slow transformation into a beast? How many had to die before he realized the cure had become worse than the disease? The physical evidence of that night remains etched into old Yharnam's very architecture. Buildings bear scorch marks that have lasted decades. Streets are filled with ash that never quite settles, stirring with every movement like ghostly snow. The beasts that inhabit this burned district are different from those elsewhere. Many show signs of fire damage, their fur singed away, their skin scarred. These aren't just beasts. They're survivors of a massacre, and Djura has appointed himself their guardian angel. Eileen, we can assume, was aware of the burning. Every hunter would have been. But where Djura saw an atrocity that changed his entire worldview, Eileen likely saw confirmation of why her work was necessary. If hunters could become the instruments of such wholesale slaughter, then the importance of preventing blood-drunkenness becomes even clearer. Someone needs to stop hunters before they reach the point where burning an entire district seems reasonable. Someone needs to be the check on power that corrupts even those with the best intentions. This fundamental difference in how they process the same tragedy speaks to their core natures. Djura is an idealist who cannot accept a world where such violence is necessary. Eileen is a pragmatist who understands that in a world gone mad, someone must be willing to do terrible things to prevent worse ones. Neither is entirely wrong, and neither is entirely right, which is what makes their contrast so compelling. The nature of blood-drunkenness versus beasthood presents another fascinating parallel between our two hunters' philosophies. Eileen hunts those who have succumbed to blood-drunkenness, a condition that leaves the hunter physically human but mentally corrupted. They retain their skills, their weapons, their human form, but they've lost something essential. Call it empathy, morality, or simply restraint. They hunt not from duty, but from addiction, killing for the sheer pleasure of it. In Eileen's view, these hunters are more dangerous than any beast because they combine human intelligence with bestial savagery. The game presents blood-drunkenness as almost inevitable for hunters who survive long enough. The constant exposure to blood, the repeated violence, the gradual desensitization to death, all of it wears away at a hunter's humanity. The old blood that grants hunters their supernatural abilities also whispers to them, urging them toward greater violence, more elaborate kills. What starts as necessary evil becomes casual cruelty, then eventually sadistic pleasure. Eileen has witnessed this transformation countless times. She's seen good hunters, people who started with noble intentions, gradually lose themselves to the hunt. Perhaps she's even felt the pull herself, the seductive whisper that says, one more kill couldn't hurt, that the blood-drunk hunter she's about to execute might have valuable blood echoes, that there's a certain elegance in the perfect strike. Her role as hunter of hunters might be as much about keeping herself grounded as protecting others. By maintaining strict rules about who deserves death and why, she creates boundaries that prevent her own descent into blood-drunkenness. Meanwhile, Djura protects those who have undergone the physical transformation of beasthood. These citizens didn't choose their fate. They trusted the healing church, accepted the blood ministration that was supposed to cure their ills, and found themselves transformed into creatures the world considers abominations. Unlike blood-drunk hunters who retain human form while losing human morality, beasts lose human form while potentially retaining human consciousness. The game never definitively answers whether beasts maintain awareness, but Djura clearly believes they do. The evidence for retained consciousness in beasts is subtle, but present throughout Bloodborne. Some beasts seem to recognize locations, gathering in churches or homes. Others appear to react to specific stimuli with more than animal instinct, the way they sometimes hesitate before attacking or flee when severely wounded rather than fighting to the death. In old Yharnam particularly, the beast population displays behaviors that suggest memory and perhaps even community. They don't attack each other, they maintain territories, and they respond to Djura's presence with something approaching deference. This raises the horrifying possibility that every beast killed by a hunter was fully aware of what was happening, unable to communicate, unable to control their transformed body's aggressive instincts, but completely conscious as a hunter's blade ended their existence. If true, this would make the hunt not a necessary evil, but an ongoing atrocity, and Djura the only sane man in a city of murderers. The player's encounters with both Eileen and Djura serve as moral tests disguised as gameplay. With Eileen, the test is one of restraint and purpose. She first appears in central Yharnam, warning you away from the hunt of hunters, evaluating whether you're the type to respect boundaries or charge ahead regardless. If you prove yourself by focusing on beasts rather than hunters, she gradually warms to you, eventually even requesting your aid. Her trust must be earned through action, not words. The pinnacle of Eileen's quest line comes with the confrontation at the Grand Cathedral, where she faces either Henrik, a fellow hunter driven mad, or the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst, depending on your previous choices. These encounters represent everything Eileen stands against. Hunters who have abandoned duty for bloodlust. Henrik was once Gascoigne's partner, a respected hunter who lost himself after his friend's transformation. The Bloody Crow is even worse, a hunter who has elevated killing to an art form, using a repeating pistol and the chikage, a blade that literally feeds on its wielder's blood, to create a fighting style that's as beautiful as it is deadly. If you assist Eileen in these battles, you witness her philosophy in action. She doesn't hesitate, doesn't mourn, doesn't question. The blood-drunk must die. This is simply fact to her. But in her final moments, whether victorious or defeated, she shows a different side. She passes on her Crow Hunter badge, effectively naming you her successor. "No more dreams for me," she says, a reference to her freedom from the hunter's dream, but also perhaps a broader statement about abandoning illusions. She has no dreams of a better world, no hopes for redemption or transformation. She simply does what must be done until she can do it no longer. Djura's test is more immediate and binary. Approach his tower with weapons drawn, and he'll gun you down without hesitation. but approach with understanding. Specifically, after encountering Dark Beast Parl and gaining insight into the nature of beasts, and he offers dialogue instead of bullets. This mechanical requirement is brilliant storytelling through gameplay. You literally cannot understand Djura's perspective until you've seen a beast that challenges your preconceptions, one that's clearly more than just a mindless monster. When Djura recognizes you as someone who no longer dreams, who has transcended the cycle as he has, his entire demeanor changes. He offers not just peace but friendship, gifting you his powder keg badge and the brush-off dust gesture, a casual dismissal that suggests how little he cares for the hunt's conventions. He even encourages you to leave, to find purpose beyond the endless cycle of violence. There's nothing more horrific than a hunt, he tells you. And in those words is both warning and plea. The choice the game presents, kill Djura for his badge and gesture, or spare him and receive them freely, is a microcosm of Bloodborne's entire moral framework. You can take what you want through violence, the traditional hunter's way, or you can earn it through understanding, Djura's way. The game doesn't judge your choice mechanically. The rewards are the same either way, but the narrative weight differs enormously. Both Eileen and Djura represent different forms of graduation from the hunter's dream, that mysterious realm that resurrects hunters and binds them to their purpose. They've both drifted, as Djura puts it, awakening from the dream to face reality without the comfort of resurrection. This shared experience of transcendence makes their philosophical divergence even more meaningful. They've both seen behind the curtain, understood the true nature of the hunt, and chosen opposite responses. For Eileen, awakening from the dream meant accepting the hunt's necessity while rejecting its romance. She no longer sees herself as a hero or savior, just a necessary evil in a world full of greater ones. Her freedom from the dream hasn't brought peace, only clarity about what must be done. She continues to hunt, not because she's bound to, but because she understands that someone must, and she's uniquely qualified for the task. Djura's awakening led to complete rejection of the hunt's premise. Free from the dream's influence, he could see the beasts as they truly were, not monsters to be eliminated, but victims to be protected. His freedom manifests as a different kind of bondage, chaining himself to his tower and his vigil, unable to leave for fear of what might happen to his charges in his absence. He's as trapped as any dreaming hunter, just in a cage of his own making. The tragedy is that both are right within their limited spheres. Eileen is correct that blood-drunk hunters pose an existential threat to Yharnam's remaining population. Her elimination of corrupted hunters has undoubtedly saved countless lives. But Djura is equally correct that the beasts of old Yharnam deserve protection, that they're victims rather than villains. His vigil has preserved, perhaps, the only colony of beasts that live without actively hunting humans, creating a space for coexistence, however limited. Neither hunter can accept the other's position without destroying their own foundational beliefs. For Eileen to accept Djura's philosophy would mean acknowledging that every hunter she's killed might have been redeemable, that violence isn't always necessary. For Djura to accept Eileen's would mean admitting that some transformations, like blood-drunkenness, truly are irreversible, that sometimes killing is the only mercy available. These aren't just philosophical differences, but fundamental incompatibilities in how they view humanity, consciousness, and redemption. The game subtly suggests that both hunters are nearing the end of their journeys. Eileen's age shows in her movements, her voice, her admission that the hunter of hunters task is becoming too much for her. Whether she dies facing the bloody crow or survives to pass on her badge, her story ends with retirement or death. She's given everything to her duty, and there's simply nothing left to give. Djura's end is less certain, but equally melancholic. He remains at his post, but for how long? He speaks of his vigil with weariness rather than passion, duty rather than hope. The beasts he protects will never become human again, and he knows this. His protection offers them only a stay of execution, not true salvation. Eventually, age or violence will claim him, and without his Gatling gun's deterrent, hunters will sweep through old Yharnam again, rendering his years of protection meaningless. This temporal limitation adds poignancy to both hunters' philosophies. They're not building lasting institutions or creating sustainable solutions. They're simply holding the line as long as their aging bodies allow, knowing that their approaches will likely die with them. The hunter of hunters tradition might continue through the player, but will they interpret it as Eileen did? Djura has no successor, no one willing to take up his lonely vigil. Both represent philosophies that are deeply personal, born from individual trauma and sustained by individual will. The legacy both hunters leave is measured not in concrete achievements, but in the questions they force players to confront. Through Eileen, we must ask, when is violence justified? How do we prevent ourselves from becoming what we fight? Is there honor in being a necessary evil? Through Djura, can transformation coexist with consciousness? Do victims deserve protection even after they become dangers? Is absolute pacifism possible in a violent world? These questions resonate beyond Bloodborne's gothic horror into real-world ethics. Eileen's philosophy echoes debates about just war, about whether violence can ever truly prevent greater violence. Her role as hunter of hunters parallels real-world institutions designed to police those in power, internal affairs, judicial review, checks and balances that prevent authority from becoming tyranny. But like those institutions, she operates within the system she critiques, using the hunt's methods to prevent the hunt's excesses. Djura's stance mirrors real-world advocates for radical compassion, those who argue that criminals, addicts and the mentally ill deserve protection rather than punishment. His protection of beasts, despite their dangerous nature, parallels harm reduction approaches to social problems, accepting that perfect solutions don't exist while working to minimize suffering. His isolation atop the tower represents the loneliness of taking an unpopular moral stance, of being the only one willing to say that accepted wisdom might be wrong. The brilliance of Bloodborne's narrative is that it refuses to validate either position completely. The game shows us blood-drunk hunters who absolutely need to be stopped. The Bloody Crow's sadistic artistry in killing proves Eileen's point. But it also shows us the beasts of old Yharnam, maintaining traces of humanity that justify Djura's protection. The player can't simply choose a side and feel morally superior. Both hunters expose the inadequacy of simple solutions to complex problems. As we near the conclusion of this exploration, consider how both Eileen and Djura represent different responses to trauma. Both witness the worst of Yharnam's descent into madness, the burning of districts, the transformation of citizens, the corruption of hunters. But where trauma led Eileen to become harder, more pragmatic, accepting of necessary evils, it led Djura to become softer, more idealistic, rejecting evil even when it might be necessary. Neither response is wrong, but neither is complete. The conversation between these two philosophies continues through the player's journey. Every choice to kill or spare, every decision about which NPCs to save or abandon, every optional boss fought or avoided, all of these echo the fundamental question Eileen and Djura embody. In a world where transformation is inevitable and corruption spreads like plague, what does mercy look like? Is it the quick death Eileen offers, preventing further suffering and spread of corruption? Or is it the stubborn protection Djura provides, insisting on the inherent worth of even transformed life? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one philosophy over the other, but in recognizing that both are necessary responses to an impossible situation. Yharnam needs its Eileens, those willing to make hard choices and prevent greater horrors through selective violence. But it also needs its Djuras, those who refuse to accept that violence is the only answer, who create spaces where different solutions might be imagined. The tension between these approaches doesn't weaken them, but strengthens them, each serving as a check on the other's excesses. In the end, both Eileen the Crow and retired hunter Djura stand as testament to Bloodborne's refusal to offer easy answers. They're not boss fights to overcome or obstacles to bypass, but philosophers whose ideas challenge us long after we've completed their quest lines. They force us to examine our own definitions of mercy, our own responses to irreversible transformation, our own willingness to use violence in service of preventing violence. The crow feathers that mark Eileen's departure, whether scattered in victory or defeat, and the eternal flame of Djura's vigil over old Yharnam. These images linger in the mind like questions that can't quite be answered. Two hunters, two completely different definitions of mercy, both right, both wrong, both necessary, both insufficient. In their contradiction lies a truth about the human condition that no amount of blood ministration or beast hunting can resolve. That sometimes mercy requires cruelty, sometimes cruelty masks itself as mercy, and wisdom lies not in choosing one over the other, but in recognizing when each is called for. As we close this deep dive into one of Bloodborne's most fascinating philosophical divides, I want to thank you for joining me in exploring these complex themes. The stories of Eileen and Djura remind us why Bloodborne remains a masterpiece of narrative design, not because it provides answers, but because it asks questions that matter, that challenge us to think beyond simple morality into the grey areas where real ethics live. If this exploration of Bloodborne's moral complexity has resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue these deep investigations into gaming's most profound narratives, uncovering the philosophical depths that make these stories truly timeless. Remember to ring the bell for notifications so you won't miss our next journey into the lore that shapes gaming's greatest worlds. Until next time, fellow hunters, may you find your worth in the waking world, and may your own definition of mercy, whatever it might be, guide you through the long night ahead. Thank you for watching, and remember, a hunter is never alone.